So we're taking this video from St. Martin quite a long time after we bought Bateau Soleil. So we've decided to make this a father-daughter project and make these vlog videos. For this series, video 1, we're going to talk about the boat that we found, the shape it was in, and talk about planning all of the work. The first season is all about restoring Bateau Soleil, and spoiler alert, because we're a year and a half later, we do end up moving down here full-time, and we'll talk about that in season 2. This channel is about fixing boats, taking the jump and going, as well as being digital nomads and working remotely. It's been nearly 2 years since we bought Bateau Soleil. We're going to go back through the time when we bought it, right after Hurricane Irma and Maria, through to fixing it up and going sailing. We'd originally done a charter trip back in 2015 for 7 weeks between the BVI and the Leeward Islands, and we knew we wanted to get back here one day. We wanted to do it before we were too old. So my wife and I are in our mid-40s. I have a bad back. We didn't think we would be great sailors necessarily when we're in our 60s or 70s, so we didn't want to wait to retire. Plus, we wanted to do the trip with our kids. So we're going to take you through how we managed to do that, sort of, I wouldn't say on a whim, but close to it, how we brought our plans forward involving fixing up a boat, and dropping everything and going sailing.
When I was 6, that was when we were here. In 2015. I loved the trip, and I went into the water a lot. It took me a while to get used to it and swimming around a lot and jumping off the back of the boat, but when I started to get into it, I really loved doing it. It took me a while to actually get me to narrate the videos, since I didn't like being on camera very much. I did eventually do it because my dad said I would get something after it. So I agreed, and I narrated all our videos from 2015.
Bribing is always great.
Yeah.
It doesn't need any bribing this time around, though. As I mentioned, when we did our charter trip in 2015, we decided to start to figure out how to save up for a boat. We thought it would maybe take 4 or 5 years. Then Irma came. It was hard to watch because we love the islands down here so much. And we discussed coming down and visiting again. A lot of tourists had stayed away, and the industry here had ground to a halt. We wanted to come back and support the locals here, and we talked about doing a trip. And then we saw that there were also a number of boats that came up for sale. Thousands of boats got destroyed or damaged during the hurricanes, and a company called Harbor Shoppers was starting to put some of them on for sale. I started looking passively at different Genots and Bateaux, sort of monohulls that we might be able to buy and fix up. I'd done quite a lot of this when I was a teenager, so I knew my way around fixing up gel coat and fiberglass, but I'm not very good with engines and electrics. So I knew that certain types of damage I could fix and certain types I couldn't. PETA's one requirement is that you really wanted to have a catamaran, something that was a little bit bigger for the family and better for us all. So I started to look for those. But the catamarans were very, very big and expensive, generally speaking, and would be a huge amount of work and money to fix up. And then this Gemini Legacy catamaran came up. They're very unusual down here because they're a little bit small for charter boats down in the Caribbean, but one came up that might just fit the bill. So after watching a short video and looking at a few photos that were put online, I joined an auction to buy the boat. We thought we could buy the boat now, potentially fix it up over a few years, and then go once we'd made our jobs a little bit more portable. Both my wife and I work with different clients in the technology industry, and for us, we'd already started to think about making our careers portable, but hadn't got there quite yet. In the end, we decided to just go. If we had to live off savings for a year and just fix up the boat and travel, we would. If we could continue to work as we were, even better. And then we'd have an indefinite amount of time that we could travel. So we decided to just take a chance and roll the dice, take the family down, fix up the boat and go.
We had never stayed for long periods of time where we had traveled, and leaving all my friends in school behind was really hard. But when we got to the Caribbean, I was excited to be there because I had been waiting about almost a year to go. So I really wanted to see what the boat looked like, and even though it still needed some repairs, it was really nice. My family wanted to name our boat something based on our previous travels, and I decided to come up with a name on my own. I came up with the name Bateau Soleil, which in French means sunboat. The reason I chose a French name was because I had been doing French from kindergarten to grade 5. I decided I wanted to learn Spanish for a change while we were in the BVI and the USVI because a lot of the islands spoke Spanish there. It was a bit difficult to get all my homework done and learn all my Spanish, but I do know the basics now. For the long term, it's just me and my parents on the boat. My older brother Toby is staying with us right now, but he has to go back to Canada to go to college soon. My older sister Allie is already at university in Canada. She's come to visit us once, that was last year, but she'll be coming to visit again pretty soon.
Dad made the first trip on his own to see what he had bought. Guess he didn't want any witnesses if he got it wrong looking at the pictures. Trips down to the BVI from Vancouver are always challenging, usually 3 or 4 flights and never in a straight line.
My first stop in the Caribbean was Puerto Rico. The San Juan airport had been hit by Hurricane Maria, as the BVI had been hit by Hurricane Irma just before. They were still really recovering, and the terminal that takes you to the BVI was still very much under repair. They had got back onto their feet quickly, but you can tell they were still working through the issues from the hurricanes about 6 months earlier. From San Juan, you take a little commuter plane into Tortola. There weren't any people on my flight, it was only about 20% full. Sometimes you can even get a smaller plane that only has a handful of people on it. When I flew into Beef Island, I could see Trellis Bay off to the side, which I knew very well from my previous trips, and there were a lot of boats on the shore and not too many boats in the actual anchorage. We could see our newly purchased Bateau Soleil, then called Toasty Toes, sitting in a bay at East End. I couldn't actually get to it because I didn't have a dinghy, but fortunately I was able to find somebody who could give me a ride to the boat so I could have a look at what I had purchased. Remember, bought it sight unseen, so really didn't know what I was getting into. Right away it was obvious a lot of things had been ripped off. The bow roller was bent, the mast was obviously gone, but fortunately the hatches and other things didn't look too badly damaged. When I came back off the boat and went back into Hodges Creek where the boat had been moored, you could see that a lot of boats had a lot worse off than we had. There were 2 other Gemini catamarans moored next to Toasty Toes. This one flipped upside down and landed in the parking lot. The other one stayed right way up but sank. That was not a project I wanted to get involved in. The minute that your engines and your electrics are underwater, you've got all sorts of untold problems. A company called Harbor Shoppers I bought my boat from had set up a makeshift yard at the east end of Tortola to bring all of the boats who'd either sunk in a bay or flipped in a dock, sunk at their dock, or been smashed in the boatyards, brought them to one place where they could be evaluated for salvage. It was really, really upsetting to see the number of huge $500,000 boats that were just in complete disrepair. A lot of them will never see the water again. Back on the boat, I had a chance to properly look at the damage. When I bought the boat, I'd only seen a few photos and one very quick video, so I was really hoping there wasn't something looming that I hadn't spotted. The watertight locker up front fortunately was just plywood, so although it had cracked, it'll be easy to fix. The starboard hull had hit the dock, probably for about 14 hours, so I pulled down the lining to have a look to see how bad the damage was there. Fortunately, although there was some superficial Joko damage on the outside, which we'll talk about in the next video, inside there was no major issues, and certainly nothing went through the hull. However, I do think the mast or the boom came through this window. It smashed the door frame, but fortunately I can fix that with fiberglass and actually make it stronger than it was originally. We were really lucky the mast or the boom had not smashed the top deck. If it had compressed the fiberglass or taken big chunks out of it, we would have had to cut away all that deck and reinforce it. Fortunately, it came through the window instead and hit the plywood. From the photos, I was worried about the galley. I know this is the hull that had got bashed, and I was afraid the cabinets might have dislodged, but fortunately they hadn't. There was a bit of water damage in a couple of the drawers where water had dribbled in through the open broken window for a few days. That'll need to be fixed, but fortunately the drawer fronts, cabinet fronts all look good, and there's not a lot of damage in the galley at all. Vinyl will need ripping down and that wall painted. We'll need to rebuild the odd window, but fortunately there were no major hidden gotchas. The aft starboard cabin will be Zoe's room eventually. Underneath the berth is one of the two engines. This one stayed dry. No rainwater got in here. It looked really great. There was a bit of work that I needed to do to this engine, but ultimately it was just really a tune-up. There was nothing too crazy there. There had been no pictures of this engine or any video, so I had no idea the state. At this point I'm realizing I'm a pretty lucky guy. The work list and the bills were adding up, but ultimately it could have been much worse. In the porthole, damage was not so bad. I think a boat had probably hit the side, because there was some damage to the gel coat and the top sides, but ultimately I don't think anything hit it very hard. I pulled back the panels and the electrics had stayed dry, which is key. Up in the forward cabin, they actually had taken all of the mattresses out of all of the cabins, wrapped them in plastic and put them in the forward cabin, which was very fortunate. They were trying to make sure the boat stayed in as good condition as possible, and because of that they saved the mattresses. There was no mildew or mold. This boat was in the Catco fleet, and considering how chaotic it must have been here after Irma, it's amazing how professional the entire team was with taking care of all of the boats for their clientele. In the stern of the porthole is the head, and the head and shower are ultimately in pretty good shape. On deck the list was longer. The dinghy davits had been ripped off. I'd lost most of the stanchions, all of the lifelines. The solar frame and panels were gone, and the tow rail had been smashed in a number of different places, so that whole tow rail will need to be replaced. In the port side engine compartment, the batteries had been removed except for starting batteries, but at this point were dead, so I couldn't actually try either engine. The port engine looked terrible in the pictures, but as it turned out, a piece of styrofoam had blown into the compartment and disintegrated. It looked like it was corrosion on the engine, and I ran a bit of a risk that I might have to replace one of them, but as it turned out it was just debris. That hatch had blown off. The engine got a little bit of rainwater in it, which caused some of the rust, but ultimately that wasn't a big problem. It wouldn't be too difficult to fix. On deck, shockingly, with the mast probably thrashing around on deck, none of the hatches on top were smashed. Just the one on the side that I mentioned earlier when the boom came through the window. On the foredeck, bent bow roller, lost some more railings, no lifelines, and a number of scratches and dings all over the deck. The list is getting longer, but as I mentioned earlier, we're going to get all the work done down here. We want to make sure to put all the money back into the local economy. At the moment, she doesn't look much like a sailboat, but that's what the next few videos are about, us putting her back together. Here's a view of the window on the outside, where it had most of the damage. And on the side of the hull, I could see that there was some gel coat damage, but at this point I didn't know how bad it was. Keep in mind as well that at this point I'd also not seen under the waterline, and that was a big risk. I didn't know whether another boat or the dock or something had hit below the waterline, but that was going to have to wait for my next trip when I hauled it out of the water to have a proper look.